Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 60 of the Memorial Memo KSR's Kentucky Women's Basketball Podcast. We have really one thing left to do until March Madness, which is simply wait for March Madness, right? Of course, we got Selection Sunday coming up on Sunday, but until then, it's just a big waiting game, right? Kentucky goes 2-1 in the SEC tournament. And we sit and look at some of the other resumes to compare with Kentucky. And right now, it's one big question of, is Kentucky women's basketball going to host or not? And we're going to dive into that. But first, I wanted to talk about the SEC tournament specifically, just to kind of recap the week in Greenville, right? So Kentucky, like I said, goes 2-1. In the SEC tournament, Kentucky beats Arkansas 94-64 to get their biggest win ever in the SEC tournament. Kentucky beats Georgia the next day, 76-61. And then, of course, the last result, Kentucky falls to South Carolina 87-64. The Arkansas, just to kind of go game by game real quick, Arkansas, It was the dominant win that we've been needing to see from this group, right? They're the number 16 overall seed. A lot of people are talking about how Kentucky is one of the better non-seeds ever in the history of the tournament. So the Cats needed to win that game, and they did. They 52 rebounds to Arkansas's 27, 22 assists on 34 makes. Made 10 threes. Like, you dominated in the way that you pretty much had to, right? Clara Straka, 20 and 13, 3 blocks in that one. Amelia Hassett had 6 threes for 18 points. Jordan Obi and Tony Morgan had 14 apiece. Tiani Key, Asia Boone, both also in double figures, I believe there were, Tony had 14 and 10. Clara Straka, 20 and 13. Amelia had just 18 and 5, and Jordan had 14 and 10. So it's 3 Kentucky Wildcats in double figures in that game, with double doubles in that game. So that's obviously nice to see. But that Arkansas game, was the win that they needed to get, and they got it. So then you got to turn around and play Georgia, and like I said, 76-61, and it was a close game for a while. Kentucky's obviously down at the half in that game. And, it looked like Georgia's going to hand Kentucky a loss. But Kentucky, I think for lack of better words, kind of dominated the second half for the most part, especially the last 15 minutes of the game or so. And Clara Strack had, again, arguably her best game in a Kentucky uniform. Clara Strack had 33 points, 33 points, 12 of 22 shooting. But the bigger thing for her, 5 of 7 from three-point land. You're never going to expect her to go 5 of 7 from a game. But if she can hit 1 or 2 threes a game, 1, 2, maybe even 3 threes a game, she becomes an even more dangerous player. Maybe she gets hot heading into this final stretch of the season. But I think almost, not more importantly, but I guess more realistically, you see that three-point shooting kind of carry over to next season, hopefully a little bit. She had 8 rebounds and 3 blocks in the game. Tiani Key had a double-double again, 14 points, 6 of 10 shooting, 12 rebounds in that game. Tony Morgan was not quite how she was against Arkansas, but close, 14 points, 6 of 11 shooting, 7 assists, and only 2 turnovers, so you'll certainly take that from your point guard, especially when there's been times it felt like she's been turnover prone. But I think the big story in this game was the rebounding. For Kentucky, out-rebounded Georgia 35-26. And in that last game on January 24th, where Kentucky actually lost to Georgia at home, if you remember, Georgia out-rebounded Kentucky. And Kentucky, again, 19 assists on 28 makes. Shot 35% from 3, which is solid as a team, but only made 6 threes on the night. Again, it was good to see Kentucky, first of all, beat Georgia, right? Because Georgia had already beaten you. And now if you go look at Kentucky's resume, and we'll go ahead and skip ahead to it, if you go look at the quad records for Kentucky, all of their losses are quad one, except for Georgia at home on January 24th. And if you'll remember, that game there was a weird circumstance because of the weather. It got moved, I think, a day early. Because that was on a Saturday and it was supposed to be on Sunday. And Kentucky, of course, ends up beating Georgia on a neutral court by 15 later on. So if you want to say those two games kind of cancel each other out, all of Kentucky's losses are quad one, right? Like, Kentucky does not have a bad loss on its resume. And not only that, but they have beaten good teams. And I think that's something that we should, look at for this team whenever we ultimately, as we're going to do for the majority of the show later on, talk about Kentucky's NCAA Tournament resume as we kind of recap the whole season leading into March Madness. And then South Carolina. I, for one, and I think I've said this either on here or reaction or something, but I've hated the excuse that, the tournament's in Greenville and South Carolina gets home court advantage. Okay? This men's tournament that starts tomorrow with Kentucky, right? The men's tournament in Nashville, no one is over here saying, well, how come Vanderbilt gets an unfair home court advantage? Right? Why do the Commodores get home court advantage? Right? It's because, first of all, the difference is that South Carolina women's basketball is great. Vandy men's basketball, not so great. Or at least historically, right? And I think the thing with South Carolina, the reason they do travel, right, to even though it is just Greenville, the reason they do fill up that arena, it's because South Carolina's good, right? If Vandy men's basketball was a 30-win team every year, then they'd probably fill up the Bridgestone Arena too. But, South Carolina fans travel because South Carolina is good, right? If South Carolina was a 500 basketball team every year, I mean, maybe they'd have more fans or just about the most fans since it is so close, but it wouldn't be, packed to the rafters with South Carolina fans like it is. Right? It's because they're good. I would say to all the other 15 teams in the SEC, get better and tell your fans to travel. Right? Kentucky actually had a good number of fans in Greenville. There were some people I ran into, first of all, to the listeners I ran into over there. Thank you all for tuning in always. It was so nice to meet you all over there. But, the thing with, Kentucky had, I think, a solid, section or two, and that's a good number of people, but South Carolina had again 95% of the gym is what it felt like. And look, I'm not complaining that it was a road game, but it was essentially a road game for Kentucky. And yes, I kind of hate the excuse because this is why you play the regular season games. But Kentucky did play its third game in 3 days, and South Carolina hadn't played since last Sunday when they played Kentucky the first time. And, it's frustrating because we go into that game thinking, okay, why can't Kentucky win? Right? We saw them take South Carolina down to the wire in that game initially, and then it kind of just fell apart, right? And then you wonder, okay, why could Kentucky not keep it so close the second time around? And I think there's a part of it that's where, when it's SEC tournament time, I think South Carolina just hit another gear. And that's crazy to say because they got trounced in the championship game against Texas. I think Texas is hitting another gear right now. If you all remember, I said before the year started, maybe it was early November, maybe late October, I was like, I was like, Texas is a dark horse national title team. And I feel good about that now. Obviously, after they just blew out South Carolina. But, again, that loss to South Carolina, I don't hate it. Claire Strack, after the game, very contrary to everything we've ever heard Mark Pope say. She was like, we're not going to talk about fatigue. She was like, it's not an excuse. We can play through that. And I'm glad she's saying that because, NCAA tournament time, you have 2 games in a weekend, right? You have to go pretty much back to back. But, most teams, like if you lose by 20 to South Carolina, you will recover. It just kind of happens. So I think for the most part, it was a productive week. You got that win over Georgia, which I think you really needed. And, it sucks because now to kind of talk about hosting a little bit, we have sat here, and well, really, I say we, it's me. I have sat here. And heading into that last week of the regular season, I said if Kentucky can make it to Friday in the SEC tournament and beat Auburn, right, just avoiding that bad loss, if Kentucky can do those 2 things, they'll host. And Kentucky went 2 for 2 on that. And right now, I don't think Kentucky is hosting, and it just really sucks. And the latest ESPN bracketology, Kentucky is a 5 seed. Now, the graphic I'm throwing here on the screen right now, ever so slightly outdated. He did switch it up really late this morning, but it's basically the same thing. So instead of Kentucky playing 12 seed Miami of Ohio in the first round, Kentucky would get James Madison, which is fun, obviously, because Kenny coached and played at James Madison before his time at Virginia Tech even, right? It was his first school he was at. So that'll be a cool connection if that happens. And then West Virginia, instead of playing 13 seed Troy, they take on Green Bay. So, and Green Bay, I believe, just won their conference tournament championship as well, the Horizon League, I believe. So for Kentucky, you sit there and you look, 12 seed James Madison's cool. You're projected to go play at West Virginia, and I think that's what's going to happen. Kentucky had been in position to host this whole time, and it even got some favors. North Carolina kind of lost when they weren't totally supposed to. Minnesota, Maryland, Ohio State all lost in the Big Ten tournament. But West Virginia, the 4 seed now, they made a run and won the Big 12 championship. Now, they're the 2 seed, so it's not an insane run, right? It's not like they were 22 Kentucky beating, undefeated South Carolina or anything. Like no. It was like it's not insane that they won the Big 12 tournament title, but it was enough for the committee to push them over Kentucky, even with the injuries to Tiani Key. So, the bracketology, I don't know. I get it. You look at some of the other 4 seeds. Of course, there's West Virginia, right? There's Maryland in there as well, Minnesota and Oklahoma. Now, obviously, I look at Oklahoma and I say Kentucky has the head-to-head. Well, does head-to-head not matter? Especially with Tiani Key out, Kentucky still beat Oklahoma. I know it was at home, but, again, Tiani Key was out for that game. I think head-to-head results should matter. Minnesota, who, has had a good run in the Big Ten for sure, and it is hard to discount that. But man, I sit and look at Minnesota's schedule, and I think the thing that saved them is that when they were 13-6, they went on a run and were 21-6, right? And then they lost 2 of their last 3 to end their regular season and then Big Ten tournament. But I don't know. It is what it is with this group. Like Kentucky. We do all this talking about trying to host, trying to be the 4 seed, and I think obviously we all want Kentucky to host. We all want Kentucky to, have home court advantage through the first 2 rounds. But at the same time, I think there is a little glory to being that quote-unquote dangerous 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. If you remember last year, Kentucky lost a 5 seed Kansas State in the second round, who, Aoka Lee gets hurt, probably their best player in school history, off the top of my head at least. And she gets hurt. They lose some games they shouldn't. and then you see them in their regular season well, their conference tournament fairly well, and then, a team that probably should be like a 3 seed, ends up being a 5. And shocker, they march into Memorial Coliseum and upset Kentucky when they were really, really good last year, right? So it's frustrating when you go look at the, at the games. And again, like I said, Maryland is there as a 4 seed as well. If I can find them. There we go. Like Maryland, Kentucky. If you beat Maryland, are you above for them? I don't know, right? I think there's certainly a question, but it just sucks because, for one, I've come on here and talk about how hosting in the NCAA tournament, I think, should be the standard that you look for, should be kind of what you're hoping for. But, and in year to year, there's going to be these, West Virginia is going to be really good one year. Or Kansas State I know they didn't host, but someone is going to be good that usually isn't year to year. And, that's going to mess up your seeding some. And you have to wonder, like, Kentucky put itself to where hosting in the NCAA tournament is the standard, right? And it's frustrating because I sit there and I look at Kentucky's resume, and I honestly feel like for the most part that is a team that should be hosting in the NCAA tournament. I mean, just take a look at it for yourself, right? Like, I sat there, and, you have 2 losses to Vandy and South Carolina. If I'm Kentucky, I really wish I came away with one of those games. Either one of the Vandy games or that close one against South Carolina to end the regular season. I really wish I came away with that one. You look at Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi State, all without Tiani Key. Georgia as well. The Georgia lost anyway. Probably wish you get 1 or 2 of those, right? And then all of a sudden, instead of being 5-9 in quad 1, maybe you're 7-7. Maybe you're 8-6, right? Maybe you're just 6-8. But, it would look prettier than 5-9. Obviously, I think Kentucky, like, you look at them, they probably should have finished 7-7 in quad 1, really. Maybe even 8-6, but it's just frustrating again because these margins for error for a team on the edge of hosting like Kentucky, it's just really small. And I mean, again, when you are comparing your resume to a school like West Virginia, West Virginia's kind of had an up and down year, but it's been up for the most part. And how are you going to tell a team that just won their conference tournament, a power conference tournament anyway? It's not like they just won the MEAC, right? They won the Big 12. It's a pretty good, decent conference in general. Like, it's pretty hard for Kentucky to be like, well, you got to put us above them, right? It's, I think Kentucky probably should be above Oklahoma, right? I think Kentucky probably should be, with head-to-head. I think that's got to matter, which is the same reason why I will not say Kentucky should be above Maryland. I know it was in November, but both teams were healthy at that point, right? I have no basis to say Kentucky should be above Maryland, but I can say, well, maybe they should be above Oklahoma, right? Just going off the head-to-head. And you look at Kentucky with, those unfortunate losses. Well, they came with Tiani Key out, right? It's not like Kentucky with Tiani Key out, was horrible or anything, but the quote-unquote, bad-ish losses are the losses that, like, you shouldn't lose to Alabama. You probably shouldn't lose to Mississippi State. Like, that was all with Tiani Key out. And it's frustrating. And even then, that Oklahoma win, like I've said, was without Tiani Key. Like, Kentucky showed, like, they can be a competent team without her. But she's back now. And, Kentucky's losses with Tiani Key, to go back to this graphic, Kentucky's losses with Key are a top, what is Maryland in the AP poll right now? Number 17, Maryland in the AP poll. I think they were number 8 at the time. Neutral court by 8 in November, right? So that's one loss. What with Tiani Key healthy. South Carolina twice. One of those games was by 4 points and really by 2 points. If Medina Olcott doesn't just break away for the last second layup for not really no reason, but, just didn't have to add that on, right? And then Vandy twice, who is a top 6 team in the country this year and having one of their best seasons ever, and those losses were decided by a combined 3 points. Right? Texas on the road. They have not lost at home all year long. That was a 1-point game. The SEC Tournament champions who just blew out South Carolina. That was a 1-point game with, 5 minutes to go. Right? And then you look at some of the marquee wins that Kentucky does have, right? Because anyone can lose. Anyone can lose to South Carolina. But can anyone beat Louisville on the road? Can anyone beat Oklahoma down one of their best players? Can anybody beat LSU on the road? Oklahoma without Tiani Key, Louisville on the road. Can anybody beat Ole Miss by 17? Right? Can anybody beat Georgia by 15? I don't think so. Right? And again, those 5 quad 1 wins there that Kentucky has, those are 5 better wins than a lot of teams have. Right? There's a lot of teams that don't have any top 10 wins. There's a lot of teams that are even worse looking in quad 1. Right? And your only loss again outside of quad 1 is a quad 2 loss to Georgia. And they're ranked number 35 in the net, so you played that game anywhere else, it's a quad 1 game. It just happened to be a home game for Kentucky. And they just beat them by 15. So if you, again, like I said earlier, if you cancel that out, or if you want to, then Kentucky's only losses are quad 1. There's a lot of those teams that have quad 3 losses even, right? Kentucky, also number 16 in the AP poll, number 16 in the net rankings as well. I know those things don't the net does actually factor into NCAA tournament seeding. I know the AP poll doesn't at all, but people seem to think Kentucky's right there, and the metrics and the numbers seem to think Kentucky's right there in hosting too. But, I think if West Virginia lost to TCU on Sunday, then Kentucky probably is hosting if West Virginia loses that game. And you just got to kind of tip your hat to the Mountaineers for winning that game, for making the run that they did. And Kentucky now looks like it's going to be a 5 seed. Looks like, to me, they're going to end up playing in Morgantown against West Virginia. Of all the 4 seeds, you got Maryland, right? You've got Minnesota and you got Oklahoma. I'd rather play in Morgantown than any of those because, first of all, I think that's probably your most beatable team of those 4. But how far away is Morgantown from Lexington, Kentucky? Can't be that far. It's definitely the closest of the other schools. So, one trip down the interstate later, right? I wouldn't even have to stop and get food probably, right? Just arrive right on in town for Kentucky to play in that game, right? And then, of course, you go look at the rest of the graphic, and if you make it to the Sweet 16, you're going to be taking on number 1 seed UCLA in Sacramento, California, and that may not end well, but that gives you a great chance to get there, right? Playing James Madison, Kenny Brooks old school, in round 1, that would be kind of fun, right? Second round, you play West Virginia on their home floor. They think they can beat you, but you think you can beat them. And if you win, you get to go out west and play UCLA. And, at that point, it's, once you get to the Sweet 16, I think for Kentucky, it's all right, let's just see what we can do. And I think for this Kentucky team, that's about all you can ask for. You know what I mean? Because you could be stuck in Maryland's region, and you've already lost to Maryland, and then instead of playing UCLA, you play UConn, who is undefeated and won the national title last year, could very well, probably will, end up winning it again this year, right? You could be the 4 seed down and say or the 5 seed say in Minneapolis, and you got to go up to Minnesota and play them, but then you got to go play South Carolina again in the Sweet 16. And then I think the worst path of any 5 seed is Michigan State's 5 seed route, right? They play a under the radar Murray State team, I think, in the first round. And then Oklahoma at Oklahoma in the second round. And by the way, if you can make it to the Sweet 16, you got to play number 1 seed Texas and Fort Worth. So that's also a crazy thing. Texas, for one, Texas and UCLA may not have to leave their states, right? UCLA may not have to leave Cali. Texas may not have to leave Texas until the Final Four. That's in Phoenix, Arizona, which is not that far from either of those places compared to other Final Four sites it could have been. So, you know, that's they earned those seeds, but my goodness, you know, they should make it to the Final Four. But regardless, for Kentucky, all we can do is kind of wait. We look at the Cats' resume right now, and you know, you wish you had a better record in those Quad 1 games. I think the Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi State losses, and even the Georgia loss are really kind of hurting you right now. But Kentucky does have some great wins on the resume that I think could give them a chance to host on Selection Sunday. But we'll all just kind of have to sit and find out, unfortunately. You know, we don't know what it's going to look like. The bracketologists and my feel for it, I think everybody's kind of thinking Kentucky's going to be the highest overall 5 seed. And that sucks because that means you're literally 1 spot away from hosting again. But, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if this staff is kind of thinking of hosting as, you know, like we want to give our fans that opportunity, come watch us play. But if we can just go down the interstate real quick and be a dangerous 5 seed in West Virginia's region, so be it. So I'm Phoenix Stevens here, episode 60 of the Memorial Memo. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. As always, we got right up to 59,000 subscribers on the KSR YouTube channel, so like, comment, subscribe, and do all those wonderful things for us. I appreciate it. Stephen Peak appreciates it. Shorter episode today, but it's just a big waiting game from now until next Sunday, right? Obviously, for us here in Big Blue Nation, we're going to be recruiting. We're going to be rooting on Kentucky in the men's tournament, right? Hopefully, they can make a run. But here on the women's side, it's just a waiting game, unfortunately. I wish there was something we could do to fill in this week here on the women's side, but I guess it is what it is. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in. I appreciate it so much. And until next time, peace out and go Cats.